reflect exactly in the written form, but often the written form is more archaic. And the pronunciation can diversify and change very rapidly. So if we set a new standard and we create a new writing system and we decide on a particular regional variety as the standard, in 50 years, it will be out of date. Languages change. But the main thing to consider is to make sure that the system is adequate. That is, that it represents all the sounds in a consistent way, even if, as for example in Tibetan, some of the sounds, like the tones, are written in ways that don't exactly reflect tones because they weren't there when the writing system was devised, but that reflect other things that were there. What's good about having a standard? Well, you can be unified. You can have prestige. You can communicate. In fact, Tibetan already has this unified and prestige and communication in the form of its written language. If you look on the currency notes of the People's Republic of China, you will see what? Chinese characters, Mongol, Zhuang in romanization, and what? Tibetan. Okay, so it's already there. It's already in the system of China. So it has the unified system, it has the prestige, it serves the communication role. People become literate through this when they become literate. The cons of our standard is that everyone has to learn the same standard, that the regional varieties become marginalized, sometimes they disappear, and in general, it's a kind of top-down model. That is, you decide from the top what's going to happen, and then the people at the bottom have to conform. Teachers retrain, publishers republish, and so on. If we look at other communities, and I'll try to skip this or go over it very briefly, sometimes new standardization processes can be positive, but more often they're negative. They usually are top-down, they eliminate diversity, they reduce the historical connection of the language, and they may lead to people having a bad attitude about the new standard, as in the case of this Romansch Einbau variety that I mentioned in Switzerland. In terms of scripts, I will go through this very briefly because I know that afternoon tea is waiting for us. If you have a logographic system, then you have no problem about changing the script to reflect the pronunciation. Logographic, that means characters, that means like Chinese. It is not really pictographic because not all the characters are pictures. Most of them are something else. But for example, Korean, Japanese, Vietnamese, and many other languages were originally written using Chinese characters. Other languages like Yi have created their own characters. And this is probably too small for you to see, but this happens to be a number of different written traditions from the Yi nationality. And as you can see, many of the characters of Yi are in fact derived from Chinese characters, although each individual variety of Yi has somewhat different forms. For example, the Nosu, the left two columns, you can see that when they crossed the upper Yangtze, the Jinsha River, maybe 500 years or so, the boat must have got rotated around 90 degrees because the characters are written 90 degrees rotated counterclockwise. Okay? And you can see there are minor differences between these. There are four main traditions, three of which have been reformed into modern scripts used in the three main provinces where Yi is spoken, namely Sichuan, Yunnan, and Guizhou. And just a brief example of a traditional Yi manuscript. This happens to be a Nisu Yi manuscript, and this is one of many which have oral counterparts in other languages. Then we have alphabetic options. Missionaries like alphabets, and of course Pinyin provides transfer to the learning of Putonghua. Other alphabetic options include the use of Tibetan by groups who are Tibetan by ethnicity, but whose mother tongue may be something else, like the Kumi or Jerome. others who are Tibetan but use an Arabic script because they're Muslim, the Balti, others who are Tibetan Buddhist and speak languages very closely related to Tibet in Nepal, but use Devanagari because that's the language of the script of the national language Nepali. Script reform is often a divisive factor. As I said, Chinese characters being simplified led to the division between China and the rest of the Chinese-speaking world in the 1950s. The Lisu had this phenomenon. The Akahani had this phenomenon. Akahani rejoices in, I think, there are up to 15 different scripts, all of which are romanizations, most of which are quite bad in terms of their phonetic accuracy. But what the reaction of the community was, guess what? They formed a committee and they created another one. So nobody knows how to write Akka, because the Baptists write it one way, the Catholics write it another way, in China it's written a third way, and then there's this fourth unified way, and then there's another 10 or so which almost nobody uses. I won't have time to go through my case study in detail, but the Lisu are living in 4 countries. As I said, India is the smallest group, Thailand is second, Burma is third, and in China, just southeast of the part of Tibet that is north of Yunnan, there are nearly 700,000 Lisu in Nujiang Autonomous Prefecture and in Weishi Autonomous County of the Dechen Tibetan Autonomous Prefecture, with 4 dialects, plus Lipo, the language that I said before is closely related but not mutually intelligible. 4 orthographies, a missionary orthography which was created by an Einbau process in 1914. A committee sat down and said, what is something that everybody will understand? Another one by an indigenous Lisu religious leader, created in the 1920s, we don't know exactly when. A romanization on the principles of Pinyin, and the Lipo script. And Lipo, as I say, is a distinct language. Here's the script which they created in the committee. Of course, it's easy to read. It's basically an alphabetic script with 15 of the letters upside down in different phonetic values. So upside down P is aspirated Pa, right side up P is unaspirated Pa, and so forth. It also has the same principle as Devanagari in that every consonant has inherent vowel A when you don't write a vowel. So I don't have a pointer, but if we look at the second last line, you'll see a good Chinese loanword. The Chinese word for law is Fa Li, and the Lisu word for law is Fa Li. So the Fa represents Fa, and the upside down J is F, because F is used for something else. No vowel is A, and then the semicolon is a low falling tone with a final glottal stop. Okay, so you can also see some of the cultural themes that are important to the Lisu in the content of this Lisu proverb. Learn to read and write, study books, and get money that way. I've talked about Ausbau and Einbau. So Fraser Lisu, the script created by the missionary James Fraser and his Lisu and other colleagues in 1914, is an Einbau script. The script created by the Lisu traditional religious leader is a representation of Lisu that uses what look like Chinese characters at first glance, but which you can immediately see are not if you look more closely. The top line here is the Lisu traditional syllabic script from the 1920s. The next line is the phonetic value of that in IPA, Goji and Biao. The third line is the Fraser Lisu script for the same words, and the fourth line is the Chinese word-by-word translation. So that's the script created by this man, and it has completely gone out of use. Okay, then finally, this gentleman, who who is a wonderful and erudite man, and he's still alive and well and able to sing and tell stories and do all kinds of wonderful things in Lisu. He lives in Fugong, which you see a picture of behind him here. And they created, along with some Russian and Chinese linguists, a script which is based on Pinyin, which is phonetically a little bit inadequate, and which is a little bit inconvenient because the words get very long. They have all the consonants at the end writing tone. So the T on the end means low tone. The L on the end means high tone, and so on. This is the same text as you saw here, written in the Pinyin script. Then the Eastern Lisu, the Lipo, have a script that looks like this. Again, it's made to look like characters in a different way, in a way that's rather more like Korean, in the sense that you have a consonant written in the middle, big, and then you have a vowel written small. What's different about the Lipo script and other Pollard scripts is that you have a little difference representing what the tone is in terms of the position of the vowel relative to the consonant. So for example, this happens to be the Gospel of Matthew in Lipo as printed in 1912. The backwards C is the letter M. The horizontal line to its top right is the vowel R, and the fact that it's mid-tone is represented by the fact that it's at the top right. The next syllable has the letter T, which amazingly is T. The apostrophe, which represents aspiration, so this is Ta, but the vowel, as you can see, is above, and that means that the tone is high, and it's not a horizontal line but a vertical line, which means that it's E. So this is Ma Ti, and then this is T with an O under it, meaning T-O low tone, Do. And then this is a Tsi with a vowel U with a mid-tone. So this is Ma Ti Do Tsi, the Book of Matthew. Okay, so with these alternatives, which would you choose? Personally, I would have chosen this, because it provides transfer to Mandarin, learning Chinese. It is easy to print, but the Lisu chose this one. And we recently helped them to get a Unicode for this, so you can now send email in Lisu. And this is where this stuff comes from. This font is a Lisu font created by a friend of mine. And we have a lot of materials that we've been doing to help the Lisu to develop their language and culture. One problem that you encounter when developing or reforming a script is tone. Of course, tone is an issue in Tibetan generally. Some varieties don't have them, some do, some have more. So when we want to write tone, if you don't leave the script alone, you're going to have to start writing tone some other way. In the 1914 Fraser script, as you saw, they use punctuation. In the 1920 script, each syllabic character has an inherent tone, like a Chinese character. In the 1958 script, as you see, T's and L's and so forth at the end represent the tones, and it's hard to leave out a T, but it's pretty easy to leave out a punctuation mark. In fact, if you look at Lisu texts written by Lisu people, they tend to be 5, 10, 20% marked with tones, and about 80, 90, 95% without the tone, because it becomes redundant. If you know from the context that you're talking about books, you don't have to keep marking Toru as low, low. And the Lipo script, as we saw, marks the tones by where they put the vowel relative to the consonant. So I will stop now and let you get your tea, but before I do so, let me just again repeat, script reform is a dangerous thing to do. Often it is done when there is a major political change, as we saw in Greece in 1976, as we saw in China after the liberation of 1949, 1950, and in many other countries, changes like that often correlate with big political change. So unless you have a big political change, maybe you don't need a big script change. It's good to have a single standard spoken language, but it's hard. And there's no need for the written and the spoken languages to be identical, because everywhere in the world, written languages are always archaic. As soon as it's written, 10 years, 20 years, 50 years later, it's archaic. And lastly, and my real take-home message to all of you, is you have to respect the attitudes of the community. You cannot say, okay, we, the 15 people on the committee in Beijing, are going to decide this is how it is for Tibetan. It needs to be a consultative process. It needs to be something that people all accept, not something that you can say, okay, we're going to do this, and then 5 years later you decide you made a big mistake. So thank you very much, and I have the references here. If you have your magnifying glass, you can read them. And I'll perhaps leave them there, and if you have any questions, I'd welcome them. Thank you very much.